Hello everyone, welcome back to Anatomy of Literature. Today we'll have a detailed discussion on Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. Morrison was an American writer, to be specific, an African American writer and a radical social reformer who stood for the civil rights of the black community in America. Beloved was published in 1987. Toni Morrison was inspired by a real life event of a woman, to be specific, of a slave named Margaret Garner, and she was a slave in Kentucky who escaped slavery, and it is said that she had killed her own daughter to rid her from the disastrous life of slavery, as she knew what slavery was. And this particular incident, which she read in somewhere in a journal, this particular incident inspired Toni Morrison to write this fiction. Now let us come to the plot of the novel. The novel begins in 1873 in Cincinnati, Ohio, where the main protagonist, who was formerly a slave, Sethe, she has been living with her only daughter, Denver. Now, it should be noted that the novel has two narratives. Well, one is of the past and other is of the present. So the past event that momentarily, frequently, the main protagonist Sethe, she recollects, or rather she is made to recollect from the scars that she had on her back. Therefore, in one narrative we see the present condition of Sethe and her daughter Denver, and in another narrative we see how Sethe and her fellow slaves were treated in the Sweet Home plantation by the owners of the plantation. However, it is very difficult to distinguish the two narratives from one another because they are so overlapping to each other, and sometimes one narrative merges with another narrative. That is why it is difficult to identify when the narrator is talking about her past life and when or whether she is talking about her present life. Now the novel, as I have already said, there are two narratives which run parallelly in the novel. The past event, that covers the time span of the American Civil War. So American Civil War took place in 1861 and it ran for almost 4 to 5 years and ended in 1865. So the present narrative of the novel, that begins in 1873, that means it is almost 8 years after the Civil War ended. The fiction tells us about the dehumanizing condition that the slaves at that time had to face. Sethe used to work in Sweet Home plantation during the time of the American Civil War with her husband Hallie and her mother-in-law Baby Suggs and her other friends and fellow slaves. And from there she fled because once their previous owner, former owner, died, the new owner that came to maintain the Sweet Home plantation, he was very torturous. He is called the schoolmaster. He used to beat Sethe and other fellow slaves. Hallie released her mother Baby Suggs from the slavery by working hard and paying the price for her. And after this, when he tried to work hard in order to release Sethe and himself, the schoolmaster started to torture every slave workers in the plantation, and his tortures grew and increased day by day, and It reached beyond their tolerance when the schoolmaster and his nephews started to kill their fellow slaves, and once they started to torture Sethe physically. At that time, Sethe had already 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, and she was also pregnant. At that time, the nephews of the school teacher tortured her physically and stole her breast milk, which she was producing for her baby who was to born. This incident of torturing Sethe was overseen by her husband Hali, which made her shocked, and he was senseless at that time. However, after that incident, Sethe somehow managed to run away from the plantation. She met a white girl called Amy Denver in a forest near the Ohio River, who helped her in delivering the baby which she was bearing. And that is why later Sethe named her daughter Denver after the name of Amy Denver, who helped her in that condition. So after running away from Sweet Home Plantation, she came to the house where her mother-in-law was living, the 124 Bluestone Road in Cincinnati. Within a few days, the schoolmaster and his nephew came to 124 Bluestone Road in order to retrieve Sethe and her sons and daughter back to the Sweet Home Plantation. At that moment, realizing how disastrous and how terrible the life of a slave was in a plantation, Sethe decided to kill her sons and daughters rather than to give them up to the schoolmaster and his nephews. However, her daughter Denver was still in her lap at the time, sucking her mother's milk, and she killed her elder daughter, but he could not kill her sons, because seeing Sethe killing her elder daughter, the schoolmaster and his nephews thought that she has gone mad. Therefore, they left her there and returned to their plantation without taking Sethe. After this incident, Sethe's 2 sons, Howard and Burglar, they left the house because they thought that the evil ghost of their sister, whom Sethe murdered, they thought that this evil force, this evil ghost haunted their house, the 124 Bluestone Road house in Cincinnati. And after they left the house, after a few days, Sethe's mother-in-law, Baby Suggs, also died. So only Sethe and her younger daughter Denver were left in the house, and the entire community who lived there, they used to believe that their house is haunted by the revenant of Sethe's former child, the daughter whom she killed. Now coming to the present narrative, we see that after many years, Paul D has come to Bluestone Road to find Sethe. Actually, Paul D was also in love with Sethe, in spite of knowing the fact that she was married and she had babies as well. So Paul D came to Sethe's house. A few days they lived together, but Sethe's daughter Denver started to hate Paul D and she wanted him to leave the house. Paul D tells Sethe how he was tortured and he was taken to Georgia after Sethe left the sweet home plantation, and there he used to live like an animal. He was treated like an animal, and somehow he has run away from Georgia and has come to Sethe in order to show his love for her, that he still loves her. So we see that a few days they lived together, but one day when they were coming back, they means here Sethe, Paul D, and Sethe's daughter Denver, they were coming back from a carnival festival. They encountered a young girl who called herself Beloved. Now Sethe took her to her house and treated her well, and she started to believe that it was her first daughter whom she had killed mercilessly. As days passed by, Beloved became very close to Denver and Sethe, and also Beloved tried to banish Paul D from the house because she hated him. After a few days, when Paul D came to know about Sethe's rough choice of killing her daughter in order to save her from the life of slavery, he left the house himself and started to sleep in the basement of the local church. He somehow could not accept the fact that Sethe killed her own daughter. So he left the house by himself. When Paul D left their house, at first Denver and Beloved became very happy that he has left their house. But within a few days, Denver started to notice that Beloved has become very obese and fat, and her demands grew day by day. She started to be exploitative and became very manipulative. Her demands grew day by day, and she demanded every impossible things to Sethe, and she knew the fact that Sethe would do everything for her. Denver also started to notice the fact that Beloved grew fat and fat day by day, while at the same time Sethe became more weak because all the food they could afford, Sethe gave it to Beloved, and her size grew day by day, while Sethe's body became slender and weak. Seeing the fact that things are getting out of control, Denver leaves the house premises for the first time in 12 years in order to seek help from the black community who lives along with them in 124 Bluestone Road. So she goes to her former teacher, Lady Jones. So after listening everything from Denver, Mrs. Lady Jones and other women living in 124 Bluestone Road, they decided to help both Sethe and Denver and exorcise the ghost, the spirit Beloved, from the house. All the women of the community living there, led by Ella, who was a former friend of Sethe, they came to Sethe's house, and when they arrived, they saw that Beloved and Sethe are sitting on the porch. Beloved is naked. She is looking like a pregnant woman, whereas Sethe is very thin and slender woman. She is looking like Beloved's daughter. She has become so thin and weak. So there comes a person called Mr. Baldwin who has come there in order to take Denver with him, to give Denver a new job where Denver would secure a job in order to find an income. So Mr. Baldwin comes there in order to take Denver so that he would give her a job. But Sethe thinks Mr. Baldwin to be the schoolmaster of the Sweet Home plantation. She tries to attack Mr. Baldwin. However, she is restrained by others, but in that confusion, they later saw that Beloved has disappeared. So, where she has gone, it is not found. Some thought that she has gone behind the house because there they saw the footprints of Beloved, and after that, Beloved was not to be found anywhere beside the and around the house. So, thus, Beloved is forgotten. Sethe, at last, at the end of the novel, Sethe laments for the loss of Beloved, but however, Paul D comes and gives her consolation that Sethe is the best thing that she could ever afford, and Paul D started to live with Sethe and Denver. In the concluding note, Toni Morrison says that this is not a story to pass on to forget, rather a story which will haunt every black people, and no one should ever forget the story because this was based on a real life incident. Therefore, it is not a story to pass on, and said that whether the community living there forgot Beloved as a bad dream, people should not forget the atrocities that they had to undergo under the plantations and under slavery. And thus, this is how the novel ends. So, the most important topic from the novel is the depiction of slavery, how slavery is depicted, how what is the function of memory, how does Sethe remember her past life, and how the past life and present life overlap in the narrative of the novel. This is the most important part of the novel, an important topic as well. So, hope you liked the video, and if you have any question, please leave it in the comment box. Thanks for watching. Meet you in the next video.